All right, thank you everyone for coming out to the panel. Hopefully it wasn't too long of a walk for you, a little bit longer than what I remembered. But we're glad to have you here today. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Wallace Johnson. More importantly, I am chair of the Live Event Council. So myself and other members of the council, with a lot of hard work, helped put together today's event, which we took a year off or two over the past couple of years, but very excited to have a great group of individuals today on a panel for us to hear some great insight. So without further ado, I want to introduce the members of today's panel. First, representing a corporate customer, we have Spencer Firisen, Executive Director at J.P. Morgan Chase. Creative Director Richard Slaney from 59 Productions. Diane Dukes, Director of Meeting and Events from Professional Liability Underwriting Society. Oh, plus, that I should have just went plus. Representing Production Manager Orestes Mihaly, Vice President from PRG. And Event Technical Producer Michael Thuney from Production Associates. And I believe I skipped Bill. Bill Boris Shader, partner at Tonic Consulting Group. And our moderator for today will be Mr. Tom Stimson, president of the Stimson Group. For those that don't know Tom helps owners and management teams rediscover the fun and profit that comes from making better business decisions about smarter goals. So again, very excited to have this group here. So we're going to have them come on stage now.
All right, thank you, Wallace. I'll keep that thing. I don't want to use that. Microphones. Oh, wait a minute, I'm wearing one. Before we get started, everybody, I want to thank for all of you being here. I want to thank Wallace for your contribution. I know there are some past chairmen of the old Rental Staging Council, now the Live Event Council in here. This is a tough job. It's often a thankless job, but Wallace is already having some huge impact, and I want to thank him for it. Let's give him a quick round of applause. Okay. We want to see the kind of involvement in the association that we used to have, and I think we're well on the way to starting to get there. And speaking of which, I also happen to sit on the steering committee for the AVEC event that happens every fall. Many of you have come to the Infocomm Live the past several years. We are now merging that event with the AV Executive Conference because we found out that we're doing the exact same thing. There's no point in having two different groups. So you'll soon start hearing getting some marketing, getting some emails about this event in the fall, and I cannot recommend strongly enough how important it is for you as business owners and leaders to attend this event. We have some extraordinary speakers, we have some great workshops, some very nice networking, and it's at a really groovy venue. So come spend some time on your company, learn how to work on your business instead of just in it, pay attention, and learn something. So Wallace, thank you very much. Thank you, folks, for joining all of us here today. Some of you old-timers, and I see some of you, we know that many years ago when we did the forum a little bit more regularly, and we're bringing it back again, we had a great panel discussion where we brought a bunch of what you might call customers and put them up on stage, and we learned some fantastic things from them. Well, I think we have an even better group of folks who will give us a little bit of insight on what's going on in the industry from our customers' point of view and some very interesting perspectives. So they're going to have a great conversation with us and in front of us to help us understand what's going on. But to kind of frame all of this and help and get this started, I've given them a challenging question, and they've had a little bit of time to think about it. And I'm going to start with Spencer because he's here on my left. It's like, in context of what you do as a buyer, tell me something that's going on that you see in the industry or that you see from your perspective that really excites you or makes you hopeful or maybe depressed about our industry.
So I guess two things. One is talent. I see a shift in the last few years to much better talent in the industry. It's attracting people, maybe because the technology is becoming more advanced. So I'm seeing a high level of talent in customer service, And I'm also very excited about the explosion of video walls and signage and the ability to think about virtual scenic for events. And that's really changing how I think about delivering that to my clients.
Do you think the trends in technology are just attracting a more interesting person?
I do, because I think if we all go back 20, 25 years to when we were setting up 35 millimeter projectors and overhead projectors, it was a different skill set, it was a different type of person. Now we're really, much like my group in JP Morgan Chase, we sit within IT. And it used to be a corporate function, now it's within IT.
And those of us who were attracted to the slide projectors in the industry, we were pretty boring.
Correct.
Okay.
but we stuck it out, and now we're here with the fun stuff.
Now the cool toys are here. It was worth the wait.
Exactly.
Okay, well said, well said. Michael, what are you seeing that's exciting you in the industry?
I don't know if it's so much exciting, but you're seeing a lot of new emerging technologies and new things to create with, and a lot of the budgets seem to be coming into a place now where we can start to experiment with new technologies to tell stories. So I concur with you, and the talent has gotten a lot better, and their actual applications have gotten better. And I think the disparaging part about it is what we were talking about earlier, is like a lot of times people will say, we're going to throw technology at it to have technology there, but in reality, that's not, we need to tell a story. We need to have a purpose.
Yeah. So, yeah, we hear this tell a story thing all the time. We're a bunch of gearheads. What do you mean?
A purpose. Everything has to have a definable purpose and then a way to figure out, was that accomplished? Okay. So whether that's telling a story of like, what are we here for? Or, what is the interactive supposed to be engaging for? What is its purpose? It has to have some sort of defined result.
Okay, that helps. You may have to talk more on that. Diane, what's exciting you? Or poor Diane's fighting a cold here. You're a real
Yes,
trooper.
my apologies.
No, thank you for being here. What's exciting you or not in the industry right now?
Well, we were talking earlier, it's very difficult. I've been a meeting planner for years, and we become jaded because we've seen it all, we've done it all, and it's difficult to top yourself year after year. And I had just gone on a site inspection in LA, and I'm in LA Live, and I go into a ballroom that's 40,000 square feet, and it's wall-to-wall video, HD, high-tech, perfectly clear picture. And I know I can't afford it, but man, it looked good. And it was, the edges even it was all the way to the end, and even the edges on both sides were custom video walls. So it wasn't just the screen that had picture in a picture, it also had the video walls on the end. It was something we haven't done. It's something we would love to do, can't afford, but we see that stuff, and then we go back to our guys and go, okay, this is what we like, what can we do, how can we take elements of this and make it fit into our budget. And there's a lot of new technology out there that's just really exciting. And the prices are coming down on some things. I heard holograms are getting more affordable, so that's something we had always talked about doing. Someday, maybe before I die, I'd get a chance to actually see it in person, because I think that would be awesome. But and I agree with you too, the talent has just gotten so much better out there, and it's very more competitive in this field, which is harder for me as a planner, because I'm not an AV techie. So I have to rely on the people, that's your expertise. I have to rely on these people a little bit more to help guide us into doing things that we want to do within budget.
Within budget. That's meeting planner speak. Everything ends within budget.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll probably touch on that again a little bit later. Richard, you're a creative guy. Tell us what's exciting you.
I'm really excited about the kind of mix of old technology and new technology, and the way you can put the two things together now. So an example, we pre-visualize a lot of our shows that we're making, so we can show the client, show the director what we're going to do. Traditionally, we do that by making a little scenic model and using little projectors and looking at it in a 3D space. We're now able to 3D print that set, so it's more accurate, but we're also able to put that into a VR setup, send it by email to the director. They can put a VR headset on and check the sightlines. Yeah. And that's, VR is not, VR is a thing that everyone's talking about and everyone's using to make experiences, but actually just as a previous tool, it's really actually cheap enough now.
See, everybody here just heard you say old technology, and they're thinking, well, I was just getting ready to throw that stuff out, but you were talking about something else.
Well, I mean, I'm talking about old techniques. I'm talking about, the idea of making a little scenic model of what your show's going to look like is hundreds of years old. And it's still the thing that excites people when they come to our studio, is to see the thing they wanted to be made on a tiny little mini model. Everyone loves a model. That's my rule.
Good. Orestes, you at PRG, I mean, you guys do some pretty phenomenal things on a global level.
Yeah.
You've got to seen something recently that just knocked your socks off.
Well,
or at least will knock our socks off.
Well, I think it was an application of something. We last year in November, we did a job for Toyota in Japan, and it was at the Fuji Motor Speedway. And the Speedway is a giant campus. It has multiple tracks on it, and we only had like 800 guests, and they were going around and actually experiencing the Toyota product on all the different tracks. And what was great is that now that we have drones, we were able to fly drones around the campus and bring that feed to monitors around the campus. So that way the guests, there was one central hub where they could hang out a lot, but to get them to go down to that one track in the back, they may not know what's going on down there. They have a map, they've been told, but now to see the drone footage and how, and that it was easy to do that. The technology now afforded you the ability to do that, was really cool.
Yeah, good point. Hey, Aaron, where's our drone? Because some people are having trouble finding the ballroom. Okay. Thanks, that was great. Bill, what's exciting you?
Well, I guess I represent the token agency guy up on the stage, because prior to doing Tonic Consulting Group, which actually just launched yesterday, I was with Jack Morton Worldwide as their head of client operations for many, many, many years. And at the agency point, from the agency point of view, there's two things that are happening. One's positive and one's negative. I would say the positive thing that's happening is that the technology has gotten sophisticated enough now that the storytelling can take over in place of the technology. So that it's the utilizing of the technology in such a way that you can really have an impact in what you're telling as a story. And the story is important because that's what's going to move your audience from point A to point Z, wherever you're trying to get them. And the technology has been eye candy for a while. It's been, wow, look at that. I have never seen that before. Now it's slowly but surely the technology is taking a backseat to, wow, that's an amazing story that's being told. So that's very exciting. The frustrating thing that's happening is that there's a squeeze for dollars all over the place. And particularly in the agency point of view, we're getting squeezed between two worlds. We're getting squeezed between the client world that has procurement breathing down our necks and trying to get us to make everything into a commodity, and our vendors who are trying to elevate their profile and say, I can help you solve your problems and be a solution finder. And the agencies get stuck in the middle between that a lot.
All right, good. Well, I think we're probably going to spend a little time in that space right now, and I think that's a really great segue to the first question I want to open up with. And if Michael, if you'll remember, I'm throwing it to you. So the process of all of you have been involved in procurement. All of you work with suppliers in order to buy something for your company and probably for your clients as well. Help us understand, what is the purpose in your world, from your point of view, from the buyer's point of view, what's the purpose of an RFP, a request for proposal?
Our RFPs are basically thrown out there to qualify the vendors more than it is the price, because usually the price is secondary to it at the first introduction. And what we're trying to find out is, what does this person know? How honest are they about their gear? Because we always do the reconnaissance ahead of time of knowing, what does this vendor have? What is their inventory? What is their specialties? Who are the good people? So we usually vet all that out before you even see the RFP. Once you get the RFP, it's a technical specification that says, we want it done like this. And then we can judge by the questions that are asked back at us whether these people know what they're doing or not.
So what I'm hearing you say is that dumb questions reflect on the entire organization.
Well, there's still truth to the adage, there's no such thing as a dumb question. The question is not asked. And so sometimes these dumb questions may actually have a value or something, or they just didn't see it. So we also look at it from the standpoint, maybe we wrote it in a way that they didn't understand it. Being that we write a lot of specifications for foreign countries, that happens a lot.
Sure.
So it's not uncommon to have that happen talking between the Queen's English and the regular English.
Okay. So what anybody here, what's a response, what's a question you might be asked that you think should often be asked when you send out an RFP?
I was just going to say, one of the things I like, and I saw another company do this, which I really liked, when they sent out an RFP, it wasn't just, here's the scope of work, here's the loadout dates, blah, 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 blah. They specifically listed, this is the insurance we're going to need, this is how we're going to pay you. They got all those contractual questions up front. So you already knew what the mix that you're getting into, as opposed to, okay, we agreed on the price, but now we're going to talk terms and conditions. So all the terms and conditions were thrown at you right away, and that helps the dialogue with the vendor, saying, well, what does that mean, or that doesn't work for us, because it is a give and take sometimes.
Right.
So I think that's really important in an RFP.
I also think a good brief always includes some sort of notion of what the goal of the event is, and the overarching theme and how it's being positioned, so that you can respond in a smarter way. And I think the best question you can ask is why? Why do you want this? Why are you doing this? Why is that happening? Because then you can get to, gee, I have a different solution to what you're asking for that may be more creative or maybe more easily done.
Okay, and I have to think that some people out here might believe that an RFP is trying to stop questions like that from happening, but what you're saying is no, you're supposed to ask the questions.
I think those are the questions that you should be asking.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I do think, actually, if you ask a dumb question, I am not sure that it doesn't affect how you're getting reviewed. I think when you're asking smart questions, I think that...
Yeah, obviously you're going to prefer a smart question than a dumb
Exactly,
question, but
yeah.
sometimes a dumb question can also give us, when we're writing the RFP, saying, well, did we
we didn't cover
communicate that
that
proper?
yet.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's one thing we want to make sure is clear. But even to like what you say is having all that information and what the scope of the show is, and also like, hey, what is your 2 cents? Because like what we believe in is talent to task. So if you think you have a better way, this is your chance to opine on that and get that information to us, and we'll say, stick to the RFP, or yeah, sure, go ahead and give us a secondary quote that says to what you have there, and we'll weigh it out. Right. It makes sense.
But one of the issues that we have is when people respond to the RFP that might list all those specifics, they come back to us with questions that are already answered in the RFP.
I know.
And that's what's annoying, because that's
very
time consuming. And it's when you're putting an RFP out and you only want 3 or 4 really solid, good proposals back. And for me, I'm not a techie, right? So I have to rely on other people to help us kind of go through some of the equipment and the technical side to make sure that they're matched and that we're getting what we think we're getting on the equipment and on the production side. And then when they come back and they ask questions that are already in the RFP, that's what's frustrating.
Right. Totally agree.
And I also think that it's worth the conversation when you're responding to saying, how do you want to see the numbers? Because everybody may look at the show as building their budget a different way, and sometimes a lump number works, and sometimes I want it per square foot just because I want to see it that way, because that's how we're figuring it, or because we may be doing a job where we really don't know what it is yet, but we know there's walls covered in graphics. So if I know that your square footage price is this, and someone says, can we add another ballroom worth of graphics? Can you give me a number in 5 minutes? I can kind of figure it out based on the numbers you're giving me. So it is important to ask, how do you want to see the numbers?
Although sometimes when a template is given that you need to fill in the numbers into, there's all sorts of problems with that.
Yeah, well,
because they're making all sorts of assumptions.
and we've seen it where it's like, how much is a 3-foot piece of cable?
Okay, so does anybody here actually find a template that works?
No.
Because I haven't found one that works. So if anybody has one, I'd love to see it.
So what would make a template work? Spencer, what would make an RFP template work? How do you guys approach it?
Well, so I was going to say that, from JP Morgan Chase's perspective, we're mandated to get at least 3 quotes for jobs that are over a certain amount of money. And I think that's a great thing. I think it makes it a competitive opportunity. And I think that it also tells me a lot about how much a vendor is willing to work with me during the process. I learn a little bit about their personality. If I'm going to be talking to this person for a month and a half often, is it going to be a relationship that's going to work? So it tells me lots, and so I think it's a healthy process, and I think it keeps everyone honest, and hopefully, to your point, you're going to know a lot about their knowledge by how they respond and the questions they ask.
And we're the same thing. We require 3, proposals based on a certain dollar amount too for all of our vendors.
Okay.
So it's required.
Where it gets really complicated for us from the creative point of view is we get a brief that says we want to do this, and it says 5 minutes of animation. Well, is that 5
What
minutes?
does that mean?
Is that 5 minutes of Pixar animation, or is that 5 minutes of me doing pencil sketches and taking photographs? How do we find that? And price per minute of animation. Well, what do you want this to be? And I think the thing that we find is that the RFP is a hurdle to get through to make sure that you understand that we're serious and we understand that you're the right client we want to work for, and then to get into a dialogue and we say, okay, this picture or this picture, what do you want it to be? Or do you mean animation, or do you mean live action?
So, well, are there circumstances where you've sent an RFP out to your 3 prospective suppliers, and they simply responded with a proposal, and what does that tell you? Or what doesn't that tell you?
As opposed to asking questions?
As opposed to having questions doing engagement. I mean, if you write the great template and you're able to write a great RFP, that should reduce the number of questions. If you put your terms and conditions in, like you described, which I think would be brilliant if buyers did that, okay? But what happens if you just get a proposal back?
I actually when I send out an RFP, I expect questions. Because there's no RFP that's perfect. And every situation is different, and everybody reads it differently, to your point as well. And so for me, if a vendor doesn't call me back and say, have you thought about this, or did you mean this, or what about this, or just whatever it is, I'm not sure they're reading it. And if I just get the proposal back, then I'm comparing apples to apples, hopefully. But I want more from my vendors too. I want to know that they're interested. Sometimes they might just ask a question about my association. And for me, that's even better, because I want you to know who we are and what we stand for and what kind of events we do, so that you have a better idea of what we expect in a vendor. And so you want that interaction.
There is a relationship,
Absolutely.
with your vendor.
Absolutely.
I mean, there was an old Broadway show carpenter, and I was trying to pick guys for a crew, and I says, Joe, I'm having problems. How do you pick guys for your crew? He goes, Orestes, it's really simple. If I don't want to have dinner with you, I don't want you on my crew. And you think about it, and I was like interviewing interns to come work for our shop. And every shop has its own personality. It's not that you're a bad person. You just may be the wrong fit for that group, because that's very, very important.
Culture, yeah.
And so you want to get to know people, because you are going to spend days and nights with them slogging through this event, and you want everybody on the same team. So that's part of the process, is not only the price, but is this person a good fit? Can they become a partner? Because hopefully if they solve your problems, they give you a decent price, you can rely on them to be a partner down the line.
See, I think that's a really important part of the RFP process, is that developing the relationship. And I've often told our agency not to respond to an RFP, that we're not allowed to have dialogue, and that we're not allowed to then present our ideas as opposed to just mailing it in. And I think that everybody here should comply with that. That the fact is that you want to see the people across the table that are going to be working on your show, and make sure that you do get along with them and that do feel comfortable. It does feel comfortable.
And quite frankly, I want them to come to my show. So if I have an RFP that's out there, I want a vendor who's going to say, Diane, can we come see what your shows look like, so we understand the kind of production that you're looking for? I want a vendor who's willing to spend the money to come and see what we do live and in person.
I mean, we don't reply to lots of RFPs. Like, we pick and choose the ones that we know we're going to, not necessarily going to win, but it's going to work, like, in some way. Either we're going to have a satisfying process in doing that, or we think the idea is good. And if there's some sort of fundamental flaw in it, we sort of pull out very early on, because it's never going to work if you think the relationship isn't going to work.
But then do you at least have the courtesy of telling them
Of
that we're not
course.
going to respond?
Of course, and we would say why very clearly. Like, it's never normally we don't want to work with you. It's we think we're not best suited for this idea. We think
Or
the
you
budget's
don't know
not
us,
right.
let us come in and meet with you.
And it's better
you
to
get
know that up front.
us.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The only other thing I would add about the RFP process is, generally speaking, I think if you're doing an RFP with multiple vendors who you've never worked with before and no one's giving you feedback on them, it's a different experience than if you're doing it with vendors you've used during your career or at the same company. Because I think in that instance, it's not necessarily about you preparing the lowest bid. There's a lot more. There's a lot more at stake at that point. It's previous experience, relationships. So I would say if you're working with users who you have done business with, it's not just about the rock bottom price. There's a lot more to it than that.
Well, thank you for cracking the egg about lowest bid. I'm hearing all this quality language, and I want to work with folks and all that kind of stuff. But I bet a lot of the experience of the audience here is that they're dealing with a lot of people submitting RFPs, and maybe you guys are just the perfect clients. Okay, but they're hearing, hey, it's, we need a very competitive price. What are some decision criteria? Because if you get 3 proposals back, they're not all the same, they're not all equal, and I bet none of you are going to tell me that you're hiring the lowest bidder. Is that correct?
We never do.
Not always.
Not always. No. Okay. If it's the right bidder and they happen to be the lowest bidder. Yeah. Okay. So what's the other criteria?
Good.
I was going to say, a lot of it is cultural fit, but we look at it as a value. So it's like, what is the balance between the price, what are we getting, what do we think we're going to get out of that team, and what are we going to get a good result?
Okay. And what will help you understand that you can get a good result? What do we need to do as sellers to give you that confidence?
I think basically we all said it was basically the relationship. Actually, just like, hey.
But your proposal's got to get you in the door.
Yeah.
Because
exactly.
if your proposal doesn't wow a meeting planner, it's not going to wow my boss either.
True.
And your proposal's got to be able to get you in the door. And I've seen a lot of proposals that I wouldn't even give a second look to. I mean, they're just paper, where other proposals actually come to life. And those are the ones that you're like, oh, wow. If your proposal does that, what can you do for my event in a live situation? And so it's all about the proposal. You've got to be able to get in the door.
The proposal is a selling process just like anything else, and you need that moment in that proposal where when you're reading it, you say, wow, that gave me goosebumps. That was cool. That's a neat idea, or that's a neat way of conveying what you're planning on doing within a live event. And that's when you
it
start
looks like you put the
getting
time and effort into talking to us. That's part of the relationship as well, so that's what we look at.
I think the response has to be that, that you really understand what's being asked of you to provide. I understand it's this schedule. I understand these are the guys I'm bringing. I understand this is the equipment I'm supplying. And all the things, and I'm not bringing forklifts, that's somebody else's job. I'm not supplying power, that's somebody else. And really, because that makes you say, you know what, this person's really thought this whole thing through. They've thought about this show, and they really know what they're providing for me.
Great. I've got a question I'm going to ask you guys again. It's the green M&Ms question, all right? But before I ask that, you guys, if there's anybody in the audience who would like to ask a question, we're going to get off this RFP topic in a minute, but I'd love to get some questions from the audience real quickly. And I know there's microphones in the room, and I know that there's no way in the world any of you are going to get up and go use them. So just call your question out, and I'll be happy to repeat it for the audience. Scott, what do you got?
What do you think a fair time is to ask for a reply back?
What do you think is a fair time to ask for a reply back? Great question. Do you put that in your RFP?
I put it in the RFP and I say 3 weeks.
Ooh, I love you.
You like it?
I think that's fair. If you're talking about, thank you. If you're talking about doing a lot of production, you guys are on the road, you're traveling, you're like us, right? So you're not any different than us. I can't say I need this proposal by Friday when I'm also on the road and I'm not going to look at it. So why am I going to put you through that when I'm not going to have a chance to even review it? So on average, for me, it's 3 weeks.
In the agency world,
you just started a fan club.
right? In the agency world, we're dictated by our clients, and our clients give us ridiculously short time frame sometimes, and we have to decide whether we're willing to do that or not. And that's a heavy decision on our part. And then if we decide we are, we're hoping to find a partner that's willing to do it in that 1 week period or a 2-day period, whatever it is they give us.
Or your response is, I would be giving you an irresponsible number, and I'm not going to respond to this.
That's right.
And from your point, from that point of view, it's like, I'm not going to give you a number.
And it's
And let me
mapping-
elaborate on that a little bit. The go, no-go that you guys go through when you get a RFP, that's one of the most critical things that you could be doing. You got to be looking at your business and saying, do I have the right time, budget, and people to be able to respond to this in a way that I can do it with my best work? And if you don't, then you got to tell the agency or the end user client, right now, I can't do this. If you give me extra time or you give me a little more budget, whatever it might be, I might be able to do it, but in the parameters you've given me, because I'm a professional, I can't do it. And in my experience, that has led to more work,
Okay,
not
but
less.
to be fair, I'm also an association planner, and we plan farther out
Yes.
than corporations do. And, you know, they could on a dime say, we're planning this event next week, and so that's why they need the proposal sooner. Whereas association planners, I already know where all my events are going to be for next year, so we're planning ahead. So that's a
that's a
huge
nice
distinction.
luxury.
But my
Yeah.
budgets are also a lot smaller than a corporate planner as well. So there's a little bit of distinction there.
Generally speaking, my client, my direct client, are meeting planners at the firm. And I interface with them around budget, and most of the time, I do not make the ultimate decision around the budget allocation. I make recommendations, and then I help manage the vendor and execute on site. But I will tell you that, you know, it's important to know who your customer is. If it's me, if it's directly a meeting planner, I've got more technical experience. They're asking me to be involved. I'm going to see things differently than a meeting planner will, and certainly maybe from a creative agency. And I oftentimes, on many events, will work with everyone on this stage in one part or another. There may be an agency in front of the AV company, and I've also got a meeting planner, and I have to manage that entire chain. So you just need to know who the decision maker is and understand who's making the request. Do a little research on who they are, because I think it's going to help the communication during that process. And I will tell you, the last thing I'll say is, I often, in my business, I think to your point, I have to put enormous pressure on my vendors to get me numbers. Sometimes it's days.
Okay, great. We're going to take another question. I'm going to take a question from you, then I'm going to come to you, Steve. Go ahead.
So I realize that my question is probably going to be answered in a way that if we knew the answer, we wouldn't all be here. But I took a couple of notes, and one of the things, Diane, that you had said that if we submit a proposal, it has to wow you right out of the gate, or else it's not going to wow your boss. And one of my focal points as far as my position is to help my account executives figure out what that wow factor is. But one of the things that I found in my short experience is that that's pretty ambiguous, and that's become a little bit of a cliche for me in trying to figure out what exactly does that mean, aside from the RFP is really legible, it's technically accurate, and I can kind of tell that the scope of work is easily discerned just by looking at it. But as far as trying to figure out what that wow factor is and trying to figure out what that's being looked for, I have a hard time figuring that out sometimes.
Yeah. Hey, what's your name?
Michael.
Michael, I will tell you, just probably getting a response back in complete sentences would be a wow factor for many of us. But
Spell check.
give us, yeah, spell check is your friend. Grammar check is the person next to you. Anyway. Guys,
I can give you a classic example. It's Michael, right?
Yes.
I can give you a classic example, Michael. We got a proposal that it wowed me because it wasn't just paper. They sent it electronically, so I can click on every link to go to shows that they had done, and I could see the production while it's happening, right? So they sent me clips to everything that they had done. So when they were talking about doing a general session that was similar to mine, they sent me a link so that I could see the scenery, I could see the backdrops, I could see everything that they were proposing to do was visual. So then they would send me links to maybe specific language that is tech language that maybe I did or did not know. They didn't want to assume that I knew that language, so they sent me links so that I could click on it and make sure that I knew the latest and greatest technology and could to pare it down by cost and if there's different variations. And it was so specific and so detailed, and it came with pictures and videos and links. And then they also sent me a hard copy so that I could go in and I could mark it up if I wanted to do that. It was spectacular.
So the question we all have, is that who you hired?
No, actually.
Oh, that looks good.
Wow.
That's interesting.
Nice. There's a wow factor. All right. So So,
Did we pay extra for that?
I'm thinking we're having what we call here, this is a technical failure. So everybody turn your phones, shine them up on the stage so we can get the video. It's a live event.
Exactly.
All right.
And hopefully there's not a fire
Right, so,
Exactly.
or a live shooter.
So we all know what happened is somebody just kicked the controller out of the wall, and we've all done it, haven't we? Okay. Great. Go ahead, Orestes.
I have another response to that question, because you says, what do I tell my account executives? And something that's very important, especially if you're developing a relationship, is to have a post-mortem. Is to say, hey, a month later, 2 months later, say, hey, how'd we do? What did I do good? Because you may say, you did really well. That proposal knocked my socks off. Now the account executive says, okay, I get it. So, and that's what works for that particular event planner. It may not be the same thing for the other one. So it is important that you go back to your client and you say, hey, how'd we do?
Even if you lost it, by the way.
Even if you lost it. Why did I lose it? Be honest, because you know what? It's not a dumb question.
Right.
What did I do wrong?
I just wouldn't call it a post-mortem because that's so morbid. It's a debrief.
Okay.
It's a post-con.
So the point is, what you're saying is that wow is out there. It's up to you to start figuring out some things that will wow. And that was a real simple way to do some wow. So that was a great example. Thank you. Steve, do you still have a question?
Yeah.
You going to share it with us?
My question is we've been talking a lot, I've been hearing a lot about relationships, and I know how important relationships are with my vendors and our customers. The question would be is, when you're going out to RFP or when you're seeking a competitive pricing situation, how much of the decision is based on the relationship versus the facts?
Okay, so the question is, how much of the decision is based on the relationship versus the facts when you're responding to an RFP? Who would like to take that one?
I'll take that one because we get that a lot, because we do have our relationships that are established with people we see all the time, and then when sometimes somebody new comes along and the prices are exactly the same number, but at the end of the day, what we're looking at is value, who's going to be able to talent the task. So we do go back and to her point is that this is where a good proposal comes in. If you have a cover letter on there, it says, here, look at this, or here, we've done this, or give me more about you, then I'm going to give that even more depth of a look into what did you do? What makes you stand up against the guy I already know? And it's not uncommon for us to take your position over somebody we already do know, especially if you have something on the table that's a differentiator that gets us what we need as an end result.
Okay. So Spencer, I'm going to ask you in particular, what's an appropriate way for us to develop a relationship with you, or do you not want one?
I think, of course I do, and relationships are important. To me, I think it's probably 50-50, because not everyone is suited to do every kind of event, right? If you need a plumber, you hire a plumber, you don't hire a painter. I think, a lot of people say they do events, and a lot of people do events, and there's the in-house versus the out-house, and everyone kind of dabbles in it, and it's become a huge industry, we know that. I think you need to understand what their core competencies are. Have they done those kinds of events? Have they worked in that venue? Are they best suited to truck their gear down to Florida? Does it make sense? Is it better to go with a company locally? There's a lot of factors that come into it, but relationship is important, but it's no more than 50%.
Okay. So is the capabilities pitch, the dog and pony show, is that still appropriate? Or should you be able to learn everything you know from a proposal response on a website?
I'm not going to learn everything I need to know from that. I either need to have a partner, or a friend, a business colleague who's had those kinds of experiences in that venue or in that location, or I need to have had those experiences. I don't go with unknowns. Right. I just don't do it.
Okay.
I would have to agree with that. We don't go with unknowns either. And you also want to go with somebody because relationships are extremely important to us, because because I'm not the techie, I have to rely on that partnership more than some of these other guys on this table, for example. But I also want somebody who's going to be able to produce for us. So if you can't do that, the relationship isn't going to help. You still have to be able to produce, and that's what makes the difference. So yeah, relationships matter, but they only matter if you can do what you say you do.
And when we come into this we don't supply gear. We don't supply the tech side of things. We work with people like yourselves to do that. But we'll go into bat with the client to get the right person in against the price point if we think it's going to help us deliver what the show's going to be. And actually, that's not just about what have you responded to, but it's how do we think you're going to respond when there's a small change. We need a couple of extra power strips and a monitor. Like Spencer and I were saying this earlier on, like, are we going to get charged for that power strip? Are we going to get charged for that monitor? Well, how's that going to work? And actually somebody who we know is going to have a few extra cables on the van, they're going to have the right kind of crew in place who are going to deal with it, get on with it, is far more value than saving 5% on the price.
Right. So before we got up here and we were all standing around talking, it was actually quite entertaining because they were revealing a trade secret about putting green M&Ms into RFPs to find out if you're paying attention. Which one of you wants to share something that you've done or that you know has been done to suppliers and what happened? Give me a green M&M story.
Yeah, that was actually, the green M&M story was actually a story in the rock and roll days in Denver, Colorado, when Van Halen was touring, and in their riders they would put in, we need all the green M&Ms removed from the M&Ms. We want 4 pounds of M&Ms. So the first thing the production manager would do when they go on site is go in there and look and make sure there was no green M&Ms. If there weren't, we knew you weren't listening, and so for the rest of that day of loading and all that, we treat you like hell.
Yeah.
But it's things like that we do in the RFP process too. We'll drop little items in the RFP that we know you have to ask the question.
Right.
And so they're leading items, and that tells you whether you're paying attention. And that pretty much nulls out a lot of those RFPs that just come flying back in and I don't even get to talk to the guy. And that tells me whether you care or if you're interested in really doing the job and you're focused on doing our job.
Awesome, great. So we're going to move on and get into another topic here. Thank you for that story. I've got some green M&M stories. Come see me afterwards. And this panel will not be able to escape the room very quickly after this. So if you got some more questions, please come up and ask them. I'm sure they'll visit with you for a little bit. Let's talk a little bit more about, we've covered a whole lot of good stuff. Let's talk a little bit about in-house providers and out-of-house providers. And this may not apply to all of us except as buyers, but we know that there are in-house AV providers, third-party providers, power, rigging, all sorts of services in there, and there's those of us who are out-of-house providers. Tell me a little bit about how this affects your world. Is this good for you? Is it bad for you? How do you mitigate it from a buyer's standpoint? I know what's going on in their world and how frustrating it may be, but tell us how does it play in your world?
So, I started out in the industry working in hotels, like many of us. And, I've seen...
Did the lights work?
Well, when they didn't, I got yelled at. So I had flashbacks of meeting planners coming after me, telling me it was my fault. But what I've seen in the last 25 years is a consolidation in the industry in-house, and I don't think it's good for the industry. I think there needs to be more choice. I also think that while there's been a consolidation in-house, I think there's been an explosion out-of-house with lots of companies, and that's great. Again, it's all about developing, using the technology and talented people and having careers. So I think you just need to understand there's a place for everyone. There's a place for every company. Again, my analogy, if you need a plumber, get a plumber. You don't put a painter in there. Not everyone is suited to do certain things. And so I look at what the event is, what the budget is. If it's well suited for in-house, then I will be happy to give them an opportunity to do it. What I've noticed is that outside companies have a much better shot of giving me a competitive price for obvious reasons. They're not tied to the restrictions of the contracts that they're bound to in-house. So for certain things where I need flexibility, it's likely that I'm going to go outside. But there's plenty of occasions where in-house is appropriate, but that's my personal view on it. Again, I think it's not been good for the industry, but it is what it is. So, I think everyone should just know what their lane is and do really well in their lane and not try to be all things to all people.
Well said, well said. Diane, you have some thoughts on this because I'm sure it affects your buying power.
It does. For us, we're in a little different situation. We prefer to have, for our bigger national events, we prefer to have the same technical company travel with us. So they're going from city to city to all of our events. So we don't have to retrain them as far as all the intricacies about our specific events, because we do similar things at all of our events. If we went in-house, that's retraining every single event for us. So it's not practical for me as a planner. It just adds more work. However, when I'm doing small shows or board meetings or anything like that, it doesn't make sense to bring my full crew, my full AV company with me, where I can just get it in-house. It might cost me a little bit more, it might not. It kind of depends on the negotiation you can do with the hotel. But it doesn't make sense to have somebody fly in to be with us at that meeting when they're in-house. So for us, it really just depends. But I prefer to have the same company travel with me just for, first of all, we do it so it's on an annual or biannual basis so that they're contracted and they know when our events are, where we're going. So the crew, I get the better crew at my events that way. So for me, we've already kind of outlaid when we're going to use in-house and when we're not well in advance.
Okay, good. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think there's a time and a place for both things. You know, in the agency world, we certainly do not look favorably upon in-house on a regular basis because we are brought in to elevate the experience, and the experience it's harder to elevate it when you're using people that are there every day, all day. But at the same time, a lot of times we're involved in very large events that have multiple rooms that need to be taken care of, some of which are very straightforward. There's really no reason not to use in-house in that situation unless they are more expensive. And generally, we haven't found them to be more expensive, but if they are, that would be a different consideration.
And this is, I mean, this cycle of you know, in-house AV versus out-house being dominant, one being dominant of the other. We've been around for 30, 35 years. We've seen this go up and down many, many, many times.
Right.
Okay, and so we know that it's going to change again, and the balance of power will continue to shift.
I think the hardest part is when the venue requires you to use the in-house,
Yes.
and that's when you get into.
But as a planner, we fight that. We won't
Yeah,
even,
that's-
it's got to be out of my contract or we won't sign, we won't go to that property.
Right. Well, and
I
I'm
want
glad you
to have
brought
the
that up, but as a
option.
meeting planner,
I want the option. I don't want to be forced to use their in-house vendors. I've been burned before, and not all in-house vendors, and I'm not just talking AV, it could be signage, it could be anything, but I need to have control over my event. And yes, I'm a control freak. But I want to know that I've got the best foot forward on my events. And that means I get to pick and choose who's going to be at the event. And for me, if the hotel says, or the venue, whatever it happens to be, says you have to use this, it either comes out of the contract or we don't go there.
right. Well, you're obviously an extremely knowledgeable meeting planner. Are the meeting planners that you're serving as knowledgeable, or did they know to cross out
You know,
prohibitive clauses?
It's sometimes, I think it goes beyond that. In certain cities, we know there are union contracts, and there's no way the hotel is going to go against the restaurant, the hotel union, depending on what union they're part of. And obviously, we want to honor that. We're not about changing that. The challenge is that if in fact you do want to go with an outside company, in New York, for example, the labor match is not something that, it's not a great conversation when you have to tell your meeting planner that it's going to be a 2-for-1 match.
Yeah.
Now, what's frustrating is that oftentimes they throw that out there as a way to scare, as a scare tactic sometimes, so that you'll go back to them. And then oftentimes they're not able to even come through on the crew, so then they'll back off the quote. But you have to budget for that. So in certain cities, the decision is made up front, just because of the labor match challenge, and it doesn't make sense financially to do it. But I have good relationships with the event planners that I work with, and so we've been through this many, many, many times. And so there's usually a dialogue about it up front, and it goes either way. It's not like one is more than the other. It really is a split.
Okay. And as meeting professionals, do you feel that the meeting planning industry is much more aware of their responsibility in making sure that contracts are reviewed and that they have more control over this? Did people?
The planners I know sure do. Yeah, absolutely. Because we spend hours and hours going over these hotel contracts to make sure that we get what we want. And it's not just on AV, You know, I mean, I've had a hotel who required us to use, of all places, a certain company for signage. I almost said their name. And we tried to get it out of the contract. We couldn't do it, and we thought, how bad could it be? And then, you know, the first day, and all of our graphics on the walls are peeling. And I had my sign guy in. He was already there doing all the other stuff. He had to go behind all the hotel people and redo everything that they did. It was that bad. So next time when I went to that hotel, I said, guess what? We're not using your sign guy. And we crossed it out of the contract, and I said, if you want our business back, it was $1 million in your hotel. If you want us back, we're not using your sign guy. Guess what? I'm bringing my own guy. So, I mean, you have to sometimes put your foot down. We gave them a chance, and they failed. That if he had been a great guy, we would have used him again, but it didn't work in our favor.
She really is the greatest client. I would just love you as a client.
Yeah, they're all like,
Because I've had a lot of clients who just, all they care about is they want to make sure their CEO gets the right room in the hotel, and if that's taken care of, and maybe the catering, they're happy. And we have the worst load in and load out schedule, and we are back to back, and it's all sorts of messes that we get handed because the clients didn't bring us in or bring a knowledgeable person in to do that negotiation.
I think the biggest challenge with event planners in general, certainly the ones that I've worked with, is when they book the original scope of the hotel, they're not necessarily thinking always about how much setup time is required. So they don't block out the room. If the room's not available, maybe that venue's a no-go. And so we all know that pinch of saying, well, you've got an overnight set, it's a different crew. So I think it's important for everybody to make sure that we're thinking about the setup time and the strike time, because that will impact labor, and nobody wants to do an overnight set if they can avoid it.
And that has to be on your RFP too, because there's events I know when we go into New York, it's an overnight set. There's nothing I can do about it because the hotel double books their space.
Yep.
And so we know it, but we put it in the RFP so that my vendors are all aware of it, and it's priced accordingly up front. So, I mean, sometimes it's an unavoidable situation, but you just have to communicate that with your vendors.
Great, thank you. Does anybody want to ask a tactful, appropriate question on this topic? Thanks for controlling yourselves. Oh yeah, go ahead, Bruce.
If you're out of house, but you come to you, are you offended if we suggest let's use in-house breakout sessions?
No.
To keep
No.
everybody happy and to keep.
I think it's a great idea. I think it's a great idea.
No, and most of the time we would give that business in-house anyway, unless there's something interesting that we're doing.
You know you're going to fight the fight.
Yeah.
You know, so you got to throw the dog a bone, and that way everyone's happy. I mean,
Exactly.
it's the reality of it.
I want my production company, their talent focused on the main room.
What they do best.
And I don't want my A1 suddenly disappearing to go work in a small breakout room when I need them in the room. So I think it's a great idea, and whether it's throwing a bone or not, it's usually the right thing to do.
And unfortunately for us, our breakouts are mini general sessions. So they're just as complicated in some respects. So I still need my production company in my breakouts. But for my board meetings, my committee meetings, all that kind of stuff, I don't want them doing that piddly stuff. I want them focused, like you said, on the bigger picture. And so I definitely, have the in-house quote on that.
Well, our definition of breakout sessions is to protect our wireless mic for the most part.
Right.
Yeah, not me.
Yeah.
Sorry.
She is the greatest client. All right, so let's shift a little gears a little bit and talk about the technology, because we're gearheads, and I realize you're not a technology person, but technology is what's in the rooms. It's what we're talking about. It's what you're procuring. Let's start with, what's a trend in technology you just wish would end?
Besides 3D?
Besides 3D, okay. Did 3D ever start? What's something that right now you think has really run its course, and you don't want to see it in a proposal ever again?
We see the word experiential a lot.
Okay.
Experiential means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. I think the trend that I'm really trying to drive away from is experiential being a bit of haze and some lights. That's not experiential. I think what's interesting is that language has become like a big part of nearly every proposal we respond to. Everything needs to be immersive and experiential.
And digital.
Immersive, yeah.
Don't forget digital.
And, you can have immersive experiences that don't involve technology at all, And so I think just the trend, yeah, absolutely. This is an immersive experience. I'm experiencing one right now. So I think I don't remember what the question was, but I think the trend that I'm trying to avoid is marking everything up with the language you use around it. Either it's experiential and it's immersive, or it's a session in a room like this that doesn't need to be those things.
Well, I'm from Texas, and we say that's putting lipstick on a pig.
There we are.
Right? Mm-hmm. What is technology in your experience, or what's going on right now, that adds to the attendee experience? What's something that's going to improve the experience that we can provide or should be providing?
So I'm getting a lot of interest in polling.
We do a
through
lot of
iPhones,
polling.
iPads. And there's some really interesting apps out there and companies that I've seen that are embracing that. That utilize the phone as a wireless microphone as well, and also does polling. And I won't mention the company, but there's some really amazing companies out there. The traditional putting the ARS unit on the tables and putting out 500-600 of these things. People don't want to do that. They want people to use their phones. So I think that is a trend that looks to be really interesting, and making the meetings interactive. People want to see that real-time data. And I actively use a lot of telepresence. We were very big with telepresence at our firm, and we beam in people at 2 to 3 megabits from around the world as featured speakers. The old days when we do satellite trucks, all gone. As long as I've got stable networks, it works really well, and we put it up on the screen, and so that's become something that's really, really been embraced.
Good. What else? What else, guys?
I think one of the things that's going away is the Twitter feed up on the screen.
Thank God.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that ran its course. It was sort of nice.
I watched somebody on stage yesterday who was running a Twitter feed in his presentation, and the Twitter feed was not favorable to the presenter. So I get that. I'm ready for that to be gone.
There's some emerging technologies that we've been involved with, facial recognition, so we can watch the overall audience, and then we can see the reactions of every individual. We can also take polls on ethnicity, ages, what you wear, styles. There's so much data that can be extruded out of just a video raster.
Wow, that
Are
sounds
there
scary.
legalities to that?
Oh, yeah. But you can do it.
I think to your earlier question, I think this was your question, but I'll say it anyway. I don't think you need to feel the need to constantly chase 2K, 4K, 6K. Most corporations just want a good-looking, reliable image on the screen that's backed up, and I don't think we're going to be at that. No one's looking. At least I'm not looking for 4K at this point. So to go out there and make those huge investments today, I don't know if that's necessarily something a lot of people need. There's some applications that people are going to require it shot on 4K. It needs to be displayed in 4K. But for room IMAG and things like that, I think that, other than leveraging video walls, which I think is really interesting, I don't think you need to feel like you've got to, because I think the trend there, every time I come to these shows, it's like 4K, 6K, 8K, it's like, when does it stop? And I think that stuff's great for cinema because you can crop and do all those things and shoot wide, and you can always crop in. We're not going to crop live. I don't see that happening, so that would be my only advice.
All right. So do you guys have some technology questions? I mean, you're looking at stuff here. So apparently nobody's buying 4K right now. Sorry, manufacturers. Any questions about what's the technology that you should be paying attention to? You got some tips? Yes, sir.
What's your thoughts on all these new apps coming out, such as Meerkat and Periscope, that kind of broadcast live that's out of your control?
Okay, so thought on apps like Meerkat and Periscope that broadcast live and is outside of the control of your meeting. That's a very interesting question.
It's a problem. No, because we were in Japan last year, and it was for the Toyota's global distributors, not their dealers, but their distributors. So these guys actually know what's going on, and they were showing cars that they didn't want people. They were, and the whole exercise about taking their phone so they couldn't take a picture and then giving it back to them, and Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so will get upset if you lose their phone. It's crazy. So when it comes to something that you don't want to get out and about, man, that's a pain in the ass. Logistically deal with on site, it's a pain.
Yes.
Yeah, there's also copyright issues and IP issues that get involved in allowing things to go beyond what was expected and what was paid for. That becomes dangerous territory for a large corporation when all of a sudden a lot of people are viewing things that they didn't license anybody to be able to view.
Yeah, and it's not even the attendees, it's sometimes the staff coming in. We're doing a product launch, and it's like, everybody's supposed to be under an NDA, and your team is supposed to be under NDA as well. Inevitability is that there's somebody out there taking a picture of, that car where you're not supposed to see yet.
Yeah, we started advising our clients almost a year ago about these upcoming apps. Now everyone's aware of it, but when it came to product launches or pharmaceutical launches that no one was supposed to know about.
Right.
We started advising stuff that
Right.
Meerkat, no Periscope.
So this raises a very interesting question about controlling the airspace, and there's been some challenges in the hotel industry where hotels were trying to control Wi-Fi and shutting down external Wi-Fi networks, which is actually illegal. The FCC has won 2 major lawsuits in that regard. But that doesn't mean that they have exclusive access to provide Wi-Fi, okay? How is the accessibility of Wi-Fi affecting the events that you're involved with? And what are you doing for your attendees, and what are you not willing to do for them?
Actually, I could answer that, since one of our clients is a heavy IT company. We always bring in our own IT lines, and we usually run them redundant, and we have them secure, and we give out the IP to the attendees and to our own staff. And then we hide it so that nobody can DDoS us from the outside world, and so we always are secure 100% all the time, and we don't really care what the hotel has.
And do you work with a provider to do that, or is that something that your team is capable of doing?
Both.
Both.
It's a combination.
Wi-Fi and network is become a real challenge for me because it's under my responsibility as part of my IT function at the company. So it's all infrastructure at a site, and so because of the dependence on people accessing apps to download conference materials and other things and interactivity, the amount of the Wi-Fi that's required, usually the hotel is sharing it amongst the front desk and everyone in their rooms. So we also acquire dedicated circuits, and which have come down in price dramatically. We password them, we lock them down so no one else can access them. But we are constantly struggling with, some hotels that have older infrastructure, they don't have fiber coming in, and it's coming in on coax, and it's not really a business circuit, so there's no dedicated IP. There's a lot of challenges around that. And we're constantly having to kind of dig into it. And the other thing I will say is, not always are the folks in some hotels as knowledgeable about IT networking as they should be. I know what I know. I don't claim to be a network infrastructure person, but I know what I need, and I know when it doesn't work, and I can talk the language. I need someone that's very experienced, and so I have to often bring in colleagues of mine in the company that's what their expertise is, and try to figure it out when things aren't what they should be. And I often am told things that aren't true in terms of, it's dedicated, but actually it turns out it's not dedicated to you. We're sharing it with 3,000 other people. So,
And they're all on right now.
Yeah, they're all on. So Wi-Fi is very important, and the event planners that I work with see that as a core part of the event. If people cannot access their email in the ballroom and they have poor cell coverage, as far as they're concerned, the event is not successful, even if the AV is beautiful. So it all has to work.
That's the same problem we have. Wi-Fi is probably our biggest challenge in hotels. Most people don't speak the language in hotels. They don't know what you need. They don't understand what you're asking for. They don't even know what they have.
100 megabits, and sometimes you'll get a 100 megabit dedicated circuit. And what I try to explain to my colleagues is that it only takes 4 or 5 people in the audience doing some Skype calls or downloading YouTube, and suddenly I've lost all my bandwidth. And so you can't control that. And I try to manage expectations around that. But what used to be 1 to 200 megabits of dedicated was ample. I'm now looking for substantially more, and some hotels don't have it.
Most don't have it, as far as
most don't have it. So what I'm hearing you say is it would behoove us as suppliers to be well versed in that, because that's a very valuable problem.
Yeah, we actually developed a role called an IT technical director, and their whole responsibility is making the IT work within the venue environment. Because, like you said, if it doesn't work, that's what they remember when they walk out the door.
The other challenge, I think, is RF. Wireless microphones, are heavily relied upon, and the space is becoming extremely dense, as we know. There's some products out there that skip frequencies, and that's great, but they're not encrypted. I need encrypted microphones. So, that technology is not there yet. At least it isn't as of today that I saw. So I think, understanding that and trying to figure out, not all presenters want to wear 2 microphones, and it's impossible to get them, and then it's very disruptive. And so we see in New York that we're managing, 300 to 400 frequencies in a day in a couple of buildings. It's very challenging. And so I think that's a space that we probably all feel pain on.
Encrypted microphone technology is available.
No, encrypted is, but not encrypted, and so they skip. That I've seen. Axient, for one, skips, but it's not encrypted yet. So you can't do both. And if there's anything out there, please let me know.
Yeah. Good. If there's no more questions about technology, I'd like to talk a little bit about creativity. A trend in the industry, in the folks who would, back in the day, we would have been just hardware suppliers, is to add creative and production elements, ostensibly because you need that service. Talk to me a little bit about how that's affecting your world. Do you want creative solutions? Do you want content development? Do you want ideas? Do you want video production from your suppliers, or do you still feel that needs to go out of house? And for those of you who are in the agency model, who are those creative people, give us your feedback on when you're appropriate and really when you're not appropriate. And I know Bill really wants to answer this question. He's being real patient about letting somebody else jump in here. But talk to me. Come on, brother.
So, I think that the challenge is to play within your lanes and to make sure that you understand what your role and responsibilities are vis-a-vis the agency or vis-a-vis the client. And the notion of creative is such a broad notion that you really need to better define it, otherwise it gets scary. And so what I think that a vendor would be able to deliver, or one of you guys would be able to deliver, an AV company would be able to deliver to an agency as far as creativity is concerned, is really understanding the creativity as it's applied against the technology. And helping to elevate the creative people within an agency to be able to deliver content that is really appropriate and really sings to the technology. That's where creativity comes in as far as an agency model would be concerned, because our lifeblood is our creativity, and that's what we live and breathe on. So if we felt that was being taken, that would be competitive, and that would be a challenge for us.
But an appropriate application is that in working with an agency is to help the agency support their creative by interfacing properly with the technology.
With the technology.
It's the whole thing that we went through when the blended widescreen started.
Exactly.
A really long time ago, guys. It's time to move on. But when that all started was being able to understand the right pixel counts and mapping, and working with the agency so that they could develop content that's appropriate.
Right. Our creatives don't get the technology nearly as well as you guys do. And so what you need to do is to be able to interpret what is this really big idea and very cool content into the environment of the technology that's being spec'd out for the event. That would be incredibly helpful and very creative. I mean, that is creativity personified, because you're really figuring out how to take that content and make it work within this technology environment.
So what I'm also interpreting from this is that adding creativity to your product offerings here doesn't mean that you have to own the entire space. It's really about learning how to be collaborative.
That's what I think.
And that's what the creative world is really like. It's about collaboration.
Absolutely. Right? Yeah. I mean, I think the other flip side of that is that when you're working with a creative partner who does have some understanding of technology, we find it's the best partnerships we have with tech companies are where they actually listen to what we're saying. We have had lots of experiences where we specify something, get something back that is slightly different to what we've asked for, without the dialogue about, will this actually meet what you want, and why are you doing that thing with the technology? It happens a lot with synchronization of audio, for example. We want audio to be synchronized, frame accurate for thousands of people, and we always get told we could do it with an app, and we can never do it with an app. That's not the way it works. Unless anyone has a good app, let me know. But there's always some reason in that app where there's some kind of too many people on Wi-Fi and different devices, and the audio is not going to be in sync to the level that we want it to be in sync. And that's the kind of thing where we really need the technology provider to come back and say, you said frame accurate, do you mean that? Do you mean this? Why? And I think the big question that actually relates to the thing about what's new in technology and what should we be using, it doesn't really matter. It's like, why is that technology applicable to this event or to the thing you're trying to the story? Like, why are we using this effect? Why are we using this 8K projector? And if there's a reason, then hopefully Spencer will pay for it. Because, I hope, because if there's a reason for it, and that reason, that's the other thing I really wanted to throw in, is that the reason can sometimes be because it will look cool. It doesn't have to always be because our CEO needs to, our mission statement is this, therefore this technology is perfect. Sometimes it can be because it's going to have a really great impact and get people excited. That's enough. But you have to acknowledge the things that are just the eye candy, the things you really want to just throw some technology at it, so that you don't just do that for everything, spend a fortune and don't really achieve what you want to achieve.
I think it's appropriate for you guys to play in the creative space if you want to and you have the ability to do it. I think that, my clients come to me oftentimes and there just isn't a budget to go to a creative agency, and it doesn't make sense. It's not something, it's something that's, easily done. I'll say that in quotations. But I think, so it's definitely whether it's production, editing, creating graphics, if you want to build that vertical in your firm, you just hire the right people and understand that it's very different than rigging lights and setting up sound. And it's a very different discipline. It takes a different kind of person. But if you want to play in that space, I think it's fine. And there's lots of opportunity because, again, you just don't always want to go to an agency for lots of different reasons. So, when I can't handle it in-house, I will ask an appropriate vendor who's doing the staging, hey, can you get your division to step up and help me with this? And they've created a dedicated division to that that's different. They call it something else, so it's branded within the company, so people don't get confused.
Yeah, and if you have a question about this, please raise your hand. Diane, do you
I
guys?
totally agree with what he just said, because I like my production company to be able to partner with us, and if they have creative ideas, if they've been to another show or worked with another client and they are able to produce something that they know might work for me, I love it when they come to me and say, hey, Diane, have you thought about doing this? Or we just saw this at a show. Or they send me an email and say, hey, we just saw this. Would this work for you? Maybe it will, maybe it won't, but it's a great idea. Maybe it'll work on the next show. Maybe it doesn't work on the one we're working on now, but it's something always in the back of my mind that, oh, they just sent me this, so I know it's valuable because we have that relationship, so I will definitely look at it, and then I think, oh, well, maybe it doesn't work on this show, but maybe it'll work on the next one. So I like that collaboration, and I like the fact that they're always thinking about my event and what might work, and throw me those ideas. And then maybe there's elements, we happened to be in New York for an event, and we were walking the NFL experience with one of our vendors, and we're like, oh, we really like this cool element. He never said anything, but 6 months later, he's like, oh, hey, remember we were walking the NFL experience and you said you liked this? What if we did this, this, and this, and put this on your backdrop? And we ended up using part of that as our stage set for the following year. So he had never said anything to me. He just listened, noted it, and then when it came time when we were talking about looking for something we needed, he's like, hey, I remember you said you'd like this. What if we did this? And it was a great way for me to recognize that he listened to what I had to say, and he just kept it in his mind and waited for the right opportunity to use it. And it was a great fit, right? So there's a lot of times that you might have that relationship with your client where you see something and like, hey, this will work for somebody else, and they want to hear it. Those are great suggestions because you guys know your industry better than I as a planner do. So I want to hear, I loved what I saw in that NFL experience, but there's no way I could have afforded it. He figured out how to make it work for us.
So that's a different form of creativity.
Right.
And that's what I'm talking about. So it wasn't that he developed a content story that would allow you to say X, Y, or Z.
Right.
He came up with a creative technology solution that really sang to you, and that's perfect. Yeah. And that's the hardest dance that you guys have to play. You have to play the dance between the three of us here, the agency buyer, the corporate buyer, and the association buyer, who have different needs and yet in some ways work with each other. And you need to dance along with us so that we're all partners in this arena.
Good. Questions? Yes, Wallace.
going back to the in-house, outside vendor piece, we've gone through the RFP, the creative proposal, the wow factor. We haven't talked about the unholy trinity of rigging, power, and internet in your budget, and how, you get a great proposal, you got a great relationship with a partner, but now you're staring at numbers from that partner in the in-house, and the variable is rigging, power, and internet, things that the outside vendor can't control. They wowed you, you got the relationship. Does that help you stretch your budget, or are you confined by your budgets? How do you make decisions around dealing with the unholy trinity of those things?
All right, so let me kind of reframe the question a little bit. The unholy trinity being power, internet, and rigging,
Extortion payments.
and how the venue can sometimes leverage that against your wonderful value proposition.
Because you can't write that out of a contract.
Yeah.
We've tried.
Yeah. But does that still preclude you from using an outside supplier?
No, not at all. And I actually, a lot of my vendors will do the legwork for me, and they'll put it on their quote as a direct bill to the hotel. But they'll go to the hotel engineering guys and say, hey, we need 3-phase, 300 amp. And they'll put it on their quote, and they'll just write, this will be direct billed to you from the hotel. But they'll do the legwork for me, which I expect. I shouldn't have to do that.
So, but you guys are savvy enough to know that it's appropriate for you to put it in your RFP,
Yeah.
that direct bill is you. And I know, and I have seen these, I have read RFPs where the meeting planner foisted it on the supplier saying, you have to provide us a quote for power, internet, and rigging, even though the venue has jurisdiction.
I mean, listen, if a planner or whoever's holding the budget, owns the budget, says, if there's a $70,000 charge for rigging and IT and so forth, if they're going to say, well, that comes out of the overall budget, then, I think it's going to affect the functionality of the event. And so I think it's important to have that relationship with your colleagues or whoever owns the budget to make sure that that's a control, that's a cost that's not negotiable. You can't negotiate it down necessarily, unless you've got some leverage. And of course, if you go in-house, you've got a little bit of leverage.
Right, and so I think probably the point that you're trying to make is that sometimes the venue will say, okay, here's the $80,000 worth of charges.
Because you're going out of house.
Because you're going out of house, but if you go in-house,
we'll knock it down to 20.
We're going to knock it down to 20. And is that ethical? Is that appropriate? Is that I mean, is that good? Did you just improve your buying power and you're happy, or are you a little bit irritated? Because they're
Well, I'm always irritated if they're increasing my budget for no reason.
She's always irritated, but she's a great client.
Exactly. I don't know if it's unethical, but I think you could certainly question how could it possibly cost $75,000 to rig that? The markup on that is outrageous, and I think and I think that's their only leverage at that point, which is why they hold on to it. And I had a quote for Wi-Fi in a hotel for a 2-day event, and they wanted $25,000 for Wi-Fi. They've never been charged that much. And of course, the conversation came around to, well, I'm looking at outside companies, and if you come in-house, we can work with you on that. Right. Because it's a fixed price, and it's there whether we use it or not. So I think, it does become challenging, and it's just part of the negotiation process that you got to work with. And the budget's the budget.
Right. And it's also, it's just part of the cycle of trend that we're in again, and we'll come back again. So, you have a quick question?
Sure, yeah. So when those fees are inflated because of your outside partnerships, do you find those fees to be negotiable at that point, or do you find them to be a bit stirred?
Everything's negotiable.
Yeah, it is.
Everything's negotiable.
And we also put caveats on it. It's like, hey, if you're going to charge me $75,000 for rigging, it needs to be done by this time. And if you're done, we'll charge you.
It's negotiable if the contract hasn't been signed. If it's been signed, it's too late.
They're done.
And that happens sometimes.
Yeah.
All right. I have one last question for the panel, and then we're going to wrap up. And you guys have been a great audience, and thank you for the questions. But if you guys won't mind sharing with me, you're valuable buyers, but it's hard to get in your door. Okay. What's a way to approach you? Email, phone call, tackling you in the hallway on the way out of this meeting. What's the right way to get your attention so that you'll respond? Because these guys tell me they send you emails and leave you phone messages, and you never call them back, and shame on you, but what should they be doing?
there's too many vendors, there's too many, obviously we can't return everyone's phone calls, we wouldn't get any work done. I think the best thing you can do is do your homework, find out who you know who's done business at my company with somebody else and say, hey, and try to make that, that LinkedIn connection and try to figure out how to, because to me, that weeds out thousands of people and it gets down to people that I know have had a connection with somebody else that I've worked with. That to me is a valuable reference. And feel free to reach out to another one of your clients who knows me and says, can you let them know we do good work for you? I like that. That to me is not an unknown. And when I said before, I don't like unknowns, it doesn't mean I've worked with you. It just means that somebody I know who I value and trust has worked with you. All right. Make that connection.
I also find that the best introduction is good work. And if you have done some really good work, send it our way. Let us see it, let us feel it, talk to your clients about it. That generates ideas, and it also generates a positive notion that you're going to bring something to me that I don't have otherwise, that you're doing out there that's really interesting and really good.
I thought it was interesting you said that because I answer my phone all the time. So you get all those calls all day long, and it's really time consuming, and I won't do business with cold callers. So I need to have that relationship, whether it's through somebody else who's seen your work or you send me your work, so that you can say, hey, this is what we've done that's similar to what you're already doing. We can help you elevate it, and here's how. If you don't know who my association is or what we do or how much money we spend or any of that kind of stuff, it doesn't really help us if you're just sending me stuff or calling me. I want to be able to see what you do, or to be able to have a referral from somebody who works with you, and preferably that I'd be able to, or invite me to one of your events so that I can see what you do firsthand.
I have a quick question if I can. I'm just curious to see, with a raise of hands, how many of you get business with cold calls? Not many. It doesn't work, right? And I don't know whether that means you don't do it or you do it and you fail. I don't think it's effective. I think it's relationships. So I think that proves the point.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good one.
I think the thing that I really like to see when people do get in contact through a relationship is when they show that work that they've been doing, I want them to have actually done that work.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes.
Yes.
I know that's so bad. It seems very obvious, but don't. There's no need to mask it. Like, just say which bit of that event you did.
Yes.
We worked on the video design for the Olympics opening ceremonies in London. And I say that very carefully. We worked on the video design for that show. Like, we didn't make
do the entire
show,
ceremony?
and the video design was actually quite good. So let's focus on that and say that when we talk to a client. And we get that all the time. And I've even had that with events that were my events. People telling me the thing they did in it of my event, And it's like, that's crazy. You haven't done your research. So
Yeah, it's great to see a LinkedIn thing come back at you, and you look at their profile, and it's one of your show pictures.
Brilliant.
Yeah, brilliant. Well played, well played. Well, panelists, thank you guys so very much for participating and sharing this with us. I mean, it's really valuable, and I've learned a lot, and I thank you so much for sharing. But can we give them a very big round of applause?